Hey everybody, welcome back to the Damn Music Show. I'm Micah. This is Darren. Today we're going to be talking a decade discussion, right, Darren?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Just a reminder, it's been a while since we've done one of these. This is where we pick a decade and talk about the music within that decade and what occurred during that decade.
Sure, what happened, influences, everything else. What are we doing? What decade are we doing?
We're going to do the 2000s, which we can call the 10s or the aughts or the 20s. But 2000 to 2009 or 2010. Does it kick over on 10 or 1?
I don't know. I think it'd be 2010s because it need to be 20-teens.
Yes.
Right? So we're going 2010s, 2000 to 2010 to be specific. And a lot happened in 2000 to 2010. It was pretty intense, and I feel like things sped up, if anything, really got fast. So why don't you lead off? Why don't you start? What do you feel were some of the big shifts, movements, and progress that happened from the 2010s?
I think we should spend the entire segment just talking about what we call the 2000s.
I think so, honestly. We'll get that. We'll Wikipedia it. We'll put it in the We'll adjust Wikipedia so it goes to what we think the definition is.
So for me, the 2000s had two really big points to it, two earmarks. Mm-hmm. And thing number one is that decade really developed a whole lot of subgenres of music. These subgenres may have existed before, but nobody gave them a name. So in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we had folk, country, rock, pop, blues, and jazz, basically.
Sure.
And then 2000s, we started really getting into...
We had a lot more grunge, pop, but I get you. There wasn't that many.
No, not really.
It did blow up, 2000s.
And then 2000, we got into, on the rock side, there's rock, and then there's metal, and there's metalcore, and then there's deathcore, and then there's gent. Yeah. All are different kinds of metal. And then pop, there's pop music, there's K-pop, there's J-pop.
Indie pop, folk pop, every type of pop. All pop.
Soda pop.
Yeah. Which is funny. I always thought pop was funny. It just means popular. Like, people really forget that is what pop stands for.
Right.
I find that very interesting. It just means, no. It just means it's very popular.
It's successful.
It's successful.
And it sort of gets shoot upon,
That's why I think it's really funny when people are like, I don't like pop music. Well, hang tight. It just means popular. So you're just like, too many people like it, I'm out.
Well, and then there's, then there's pop punk, which was a whole other deal. And then there was kind of a resurgence in punk, but we didn't call it punk. We called it emo. And emo, talking definition, emo is just emotional punk. Yeah. But then emo became this definition of how people dressed in their...
Emo, pop punk.
Well, I think pop punk and emo are different.
Yeah. But for sure.
There's subgenre. So that was thing number one, all the definitions. Yeah. And then concurrently, what was cool was all the development of the technology that allowed you to find your subgenre, allowed you to find your tribe. So Napster.
We had terrible Napster that arrived, in theory.
LimeWire. iTunes.
Yep, we were ripping it.
Yes, iTunes, YouTube.
We were burning singles to playlists for the first time ever. We'd get a CD, we'd steal all the music from LimeWire and Napster, and we'd put 13 songs. And it'd be like Micah's jam track for the house party.
That was the newer version of mixtapes.
Yes.
So technology allowed us to define all these subgenres in the 2000s to where you don't like punk music, I like emo.
You go down the rabbit hole.
Yes.
Yeah, and find an identity within it. It's not as popular.
And you could find it, even in the 2000s, we started to get into bro country and country rap.
Oh, for sure.
That's a very specific niche-y thing.
Agree.
And you can't just go and find any of those bands. You have to look for them. So I would say it's a combination of technology and all these subgenres. And if there would be a third thing, I would say that... women got taken more seriously as musicians and artists. So in the 80s and 90s, we had a lot of Paula Abdul and Madonnas who were performers and possibly singers, but not...
And culturally kind of had a hard go, for sure. There was big sections of culture that said, like, this is not acceptable. You're talking about things that aren't worth our time to talk about.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Madonna was... treated like a pariah, that she was going to turn everybody into something they shouldn't be. But in the 2000s, you saw Norah Jones, Pink, Lady Gaga, Alicia Keys, Mary J. Blige, Beyonce. Women were taken far more serious in the 2000s than just the 90s, just the decade before.
Which goes without saying, but Darren, both you and I strongly agree they should fully be taken more seriously. And it's sad it took that long
Yes.
for society to go, yeah, we'll allow it. We'll really allow that voice to come through. Of course, there's a lot of female acts before that. I mean, you can go back to the 70s and stuff, but in the 80s through to the 90s, that really transitioned into 2000. Pop. I think you have pop singers being taken much, much more seriously. 70s, you got folk singers that are taken seriously. Joni Mitchell. There's a long list
in
of
the 80s
really,
and 90s. There weren't a lot of Nora Jones type stuff. Singer songwriters.
I think the popular music, right? Because music really shifted 80s to 90s, and it became you had Michael Jackson, you had Queen, then you had Van Halen, you had more rock. It was more like, and then really you had Madonna. So the sounds shifted. So women weren't competing as much in the pop charts, or there weren't as many, and taken more seriously. Is that, which is I think what you're trying to say?
I
agree.
I think women made it to the top in the 80s and 90s more about their style, their looks, and in that pop world, and less musicianship.
Sure.
Like
we could argue that across the board a little bit of an interesting 80s for sure. 90s got more like, where's the art at? Like, what are you doing? But I agree.
I just think in the 80s and 90s, there were more Sheila E.'s and Paula Abdul's.
Yeah,
and Bow Wow Wow.
Which in theory you could look at Gaga and Madonna, but Gaga's taken much, much, much more seriously
because she's a musician and Madonna's not.
I
think Madonna.
Yeah, I don't actually know. I don't have research on whether Madonna's a musician or not. If she's just strictly an entertainer,
I think she's just an entertainer.
Gaga's definitely got some.
I think the
skill
talent level and the
time.
recognition and the ability to find women in the 2000s because of the technology. It's easier to submit your demo with email and digital and video than it is.
I think music just kind of got cut loose in 2000, and all of a sudden you didn't have all the gatekeepers there at the front of the door as much. They still exist; it's still there. But yeah, with LimeWire and Napster, people were ripping songs. They were ripping CDs, so the doors were opened up. And I think I very much agree. The female pop acts that came through in the 2000s were taken much more seriously than previous 80s, 90s. Unless you go all the way back to the 60s and 70s. Because before then, it was kind of silenced as well, of course, right? Before the 60s. So you had this like window, this gap of like the 60s, where like there were some really powerful female singers. And then when it got to the 80s and 90s, I do think it went down a little bit.
And certainly the access to information. So in the early 2000s, I was in Green, Texas, in Green Hall. For those that don't live in Texas, this is a very famous dance hall music place that's been around since the early 70s. It's Gruene, Green.
Grün.
Yeah, it's German. And I was there early 2000, like 01 maybe, and I saw a band called Reckless Kelly, which introduced me to a genre called Texas country, which prior to that I didn't even really knew existed.
And now we got Red Dirt, right?
Yeah.
Kept evolving.
And so Reckless Kelly, Randy Rogers, Robert Earl King, Pat Green, this Texas country, a little more rock to it. That, when I started wanting to see those shows, I was then able to go to the internet and see where these bands were playing and order CDs at that time online because you couldn't go to the local music store. You had to get it from the band's website or a special distribution.
Really? I wasn't really buying CDs in 2000s. I didn't have that many CDs. I had a little bit, but not a lot.
Really? Even 2001, 02, 03, you were downloading music that early?
It's pretty sad to say, but the truth is I was a young kid and a product of the times. I was just burning stuff. So I was taking it all off Napster and LimeWire. I had no money. I was, at that point, 2000, I would have been 15, 14. And so, I was just burning my own rip CDs. I was ripping whatever I liked at the time. So when I go back, like
I guess I was a responsible adult in my 20s at that time. For me, I was able to go to all the shows of these small bands because they couldn't afford taking an ad out on the radio or the newspaper. All of those people from that time period, Crossing the Ragweed and Kevin Fowler, they survived by Facebook ads and digital ads and just putting their shows on their website. I was able to listen to that genre I still do, but for a decade because of the internet.
I think that's a great example of pretty much your main point is that you had country before that. You had country, but now you have Texas country.
Right.
And it was a real thing. I mean, it has a real sound. And then you can go down the long list of all the different styles of music that did that. They
Right.
subgenred out, and they took a subgenre market they didn't
Yeah.
have before. And I do think the number one thing for me that I think is really interesting, that it was really the building blocks, 2000, right as you shifted over Y2K. Oh my gosh, is it going?
Yeah.
It prepped for 2020. I mean, it really broke down the music system. It diminished very much record labels, promoted very much indie acts and Texas country, things like that could become big.
Right.
They could compete on a national level because the gatekeepers were kind of gone for a second.
Yeah.
So it really was the building blocks for me of 2020. Like today, Spotify wouldn't exist without 2000.
Right.
Without Napster and LimeWire. And then somebody said, wait a second, this isn't going to work. Let's monetize it and then build that up. So 2020 is nothing new in that level. This was happening in 2000. It was just free, and everybody was throwing out their CDs. So I like all your points, and I think that's very much what happened in the 2000s. You got 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 subgenres of all genres.
Right.
It really expanded.
And it was easier
really
to
grew.
find. It's much easier to find people that like if you're a fan of Insane Clown Posse, you're a very specific fan,
Yeah.
and they play a very specific kind of music, and it's not for everyone.
It's all clown music, right? No, I'm just kidding. So what I wonder
You can look
too,
it up yourself.
and something that's outside of this realm, but at that time, if I remember, really cable television was rapidly expanding.
Right.
Tons more channels, tons more stuff. So accessibility to media was
Right.
also expanding. So not only was it becoming free or ripped and burnable and just open on the internet was a wild place, but also there was a ton more media and a ton more availability for bands to get placement, to be out and in the public. So I think you had a huge shift and growth in technology, the World Wide Web, and it really affected music.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, sort of last thought on this. It did allow people to be successful that may have not other been successful. I wonder,
Agreed.
would Eminem be as successful without the videos and the technology to get his stuff out there? And taking under assumption that he was and is
Marshall
great,
Mathers.
which he is. Would a white rapper have been successful if his only way was to go to club and hope people
Sure.
in a grassroots level that you had to do a decade or 2 decades before, but him sort of presenting himself as the real deal through technology, I think it gave him the avenue to be more successful that otherwise probably would have been harder
It's
to
funny.
do.
It's a great question. That's like, is it the niche before that, or is it that there's a niche and so therefore it's going to be filled? Marshall Mathers. I'm going to make an unusual comparison, but like I look at what's happening with Lil Dicky, and I think Marshall Mathers. Holy cow! Here's a guy, and he even says it in his lyrics. He says like, "That's the market I'll hit. That's the market y'all missed." And I love that lyric because Lil Dicky is literally saying, "Dude, you have a hole. I'm gonna plug it." Well, that's what Marshall Mathers was. I mean, Eminem was, you got a hole. You don't have a white rapper. So Lil Dicky is the soft, like Jewish, I'm a nice guy, I'm gonna make fun of my schlong rapper. He saw a market and he took advantage of it. And it's awesome. It's in the video with Snoop Dogg. So if you look at Eminem, same idea. I forget who found Eminem. Was it Dr. Dre? No.
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yep.
So same idea. So the question, I guess what I'm trying to say, is it there's a hole and then the artist eventually can fill it, or is there an artist and then it's created after that? I think it's very much the market has to.
Well,
has to be a
success
hole.
is number one thing, but I think what's more important is the question I would ask is, because you're asking a chicken and egg question, was the whole or the artist. That was there, but Lil Dicky, didn't he sort of get discovered by he created a video for himself and sent an email to the network that he's on and said something to the effect like, "Hey, I have a funny life and I can rap. I created this short little vid. Give me a show."
So he was way famous before his show came out. Lil Dicky came out.
Yeah.
He had hit a big song that went on Reddit, and it went on a.
Okay, that's my point. So he started whatever career he has
Right.
now that's continued to grow on Reddit.
You know, it's hilarious.
That's insane.
It's insane. And you know what's really funny about that? And that was happening in 2000. So I guess the whole thing, decade discussion, I don't want to jump to Dicky, but it's really the same method that Dicky used for that, in the sense that people found a way, a niche with American America Online to
Right.
get online and get in front of people, and they went viral. That
Right.
was the first era where things were going viral. So just finishing on that Lil Dicky, though, just because I am curious, just because anyone's curious, he basically spent all of his Hanukkah money or something, or he had money from his family that was like a big Jewish holiday, and he put $6,000 into a music video, posted it, and it blew up on Reddit.
Was it-
So same thing back in the 2000s, though. You had a lot of artists going viral for the first time.
Well, what didn't Carly Rae Jepsen kind of create her career out
Probably,
of
yeah.
YouTube?
I think you're probably right. I don't know. You got a lot of YouTube stars now coming up too, but like those were I guess you go back to 2000s, you had some of the originals coming on, picking up by basically going viral.
Yeah, and I think as much as I love the Dixie Chicks, now called the Chicks, they were huge in the 2000s.
Huge.
And their ability to create beautiful videos and get it worldwide, I think, certainly helped their
Oh, I agree.
popularity.
Yeah, I think visual was huge. I mean, MTV is huge in the 90s, but really was big from
Right.
like late 90s, but 2000s. VH1, everybody, we were all watching music videos. We were all visually stimulated.
Yes.
If you didn't visually stimulate, people weren't.
There's
following
more
along.
overnight successes, I think.
I think
with
you're right.
technology
I think you're right.
available. So anyway,
think
the
you're right.
2000 that 10 years was
Yeah.
a really important. It did create the environment that we're in now, to where whatever you're into, like there's synthwave and chill and all this electronic stuff.
Yeah.
That
Chill, alt, emo, pop.
yeah, but I mean that's if you're in synthwave or
Yeah.
chill wave or
Yeah.
whatever. That's not my thing. But if you're into that, where on earth do you go to find the 3 bands that make that kind of music?
Yeah.
And now, thanks to all that, you can, first of all, somebody's defined it.
Yeah.
And then somebody created a meetup group or a Facebook
sure.
page or a follow this whatever page.
sure.
And now people can share information. And
Agree.
that's what 2000, I think, is one of the more impactful decades out of all the decades.
I think you can look at everything happening now and go back and say it really started in 2000.
Yeah.
It laid the foundation with a lot of this.
Yeah.
Going viral was not a thing in the 90s. You
Yeah.
know? That was not a thing.
Well, and just the being able to the subgenres and communicating to you, hey, I think there's a difference between punk rock and emo punk rock.
Yeah. Lets us individualize.
Yeah, and
I agree.
and gent metal versus deathcore metal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
So funny. Listen to gent music.
Hey, listen to Jen. I told you, everybody loves Jen. Okay, hey, thanks for coming so much and watching the Damn Music Show again. If you have any requests, please put them below. Smash that subscribe for us. Like, comment,
Always.
ask us anything. Help us figure out new ideas for new music conversations. There's got to be a million. So if you have any great ideas on like what to cover in music, just let us know. We'd love to hear it.
Yep. Thanks for watching.
Awesome. Thanks. Cheers.